Esther's story is one of courage, faith, and God's amazing plan unfolding in unexpected ways. She was a Jewish woman who became the queen of Persia, but her rise to royalty wasn't the result of birthright or ambition. Esther was an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai. God had a special purpose for her life that would save her people from destruction. So who was Esther? She was a young Jewish woman living in exile in Persia, a foreign land where her people were often treated as outsiders. After King Xerxes of Persia banished his queen, a search began for a new queen. Esther, known for her beauty and grace, was among the women brought to the king's palace. But Esther wasn't just physically beautiful. She had a humble spirit and an obedient heart. Under the guidance of Mordecai, she kept her Jewish identity a secret. What makes Esther's story so amazing is how God used her in a critical moment. The king's advisor, Haman, had devised a plan to annihilate the Jewish people. Haman's hatred for the Jews, particularly Mordecai, drove him to convince the king to issue a decree for their destruction. This decree put Esther in a unique position. She was the queen, but she couldn't just walk up to the king and plead for her people without risking her own life. In those times, approaching the king without being summoned could result in death. This is where Esther's faith and courage shine. When Mordecai informed her of Haman's evil plan, he challenged her by saying that she might have become queen for such a time as this. Esther faced a choice: remain silent and possibly perish with her people, or risk her life by going to the king uninvited. She chose to act, asking Mordecai and all the Jews in the city to fast and pray for 3 days. Esther's approach to the king was carefully planned and soaked in prayer. She didn't immediately reveal her request. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet and then another. During the second banquet, Esther courageously revealed her Jewish identity and exposed Haman's plot against her people. The king, furious at Haman's treachery, ordered him to be executed on the very gallows Haman had built for Mordecai. Through Esther's bravery and God's guidance, the Jews were saved, and Mordecai was elevated to a position of honor. Now, why is Esther's story important? It shows how God works through ordinary people in extraordinary ways. Esther didn't seek power or glory. She was placed in a position of influence by God, and she used that influence to protect her people. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations that seem beyond our control, but just like Esther, we can trust that God is at work, weaving our lives into his greater plan. Where did Esther's strength come from? Her faith in God was her foundation. She knew the risk she was taking, but she trusted that God had placed her in that position for a reason. Her story encourages us to rely on God's strength when we face challenges. Esther didn't act alone. She sought the support of her people through prayer and fasting, showing us the power of community in facing difficult times. When we think about how Esther's story points to Christ, we see a foreshadowing of Jesus' role as our intercessor. Just as Esther stood in the gap for her people, risking her life to save them, Jesus stands in the gap for us, offering his life so that we might be saved. Esther's willingness to sacrifice her safety for the sake of others mirrors the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. Esther's story is for everyone. It's for anyone who has ever felt insignificant or powerless. It's for those who find themselves in positions they never expected, wondering why they are there. It's a story for those who need to be reminded that God is always at work, even in the most challenging circumstances. Esther teaches us that we can make a difference, no matter where we come from or what we think we lack.